Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. In about 15 minutes, Governor Newsom is expected to begin a news conference to spell out his endemic strategy. What does living with the virus mean here in California? We'll bring you his speech live when it begins. Now, we just got a preview, though, of the strategy, and it's called S.M.A.R.T.E.R. That's an acronym. So we're going to show you what that means. S is for shots, M, masks, A, awareness, R, readiness, T, testing, E, education, and R, which is RX, as in treatment. So joining us now to discuss what this means and their insight on how best to manage the virus going forward. In just a few minutes, UCSF infectious diseases specialist, Dr. Monica Gandhi. But first, San Francisco State University medical anthropologist, Professor Martha Lincoln. Professor Lincoln, thanks for your time today.
Kristen, thanks so much for having me.
We were all watching this very closely. I want you to break this down for me because you know, the point of moving into an endemic is that people will have choice. This week, we now had the choice to mask up indoors in public places, in most places, not in Santa Clara County, after the state lifted its mandate. But discuss that concept of choice. From this point forward, should we consider just our own risk factors, our own comfort level when we look at these things, or do we have a responsibility to also consider others?
Kristen, that's a great question. I think it's really important for us to be a little critical of the concept that public health is a choice and that individual choices are the way that we can best protect ourselves and others. To a certain extent, we need, reasonably enough, to be thinking about the situation of others. We need to be thinking about equity when we are making those choices and when we are setting policy. We are in a highly vaccinated area, relatively, in California and the Bay Area, but we've still lost almost 9 million Californians in this pandemic. So something we need to be thinking about in our policies and in our private lives is that acceptable to us?
Wait, say that again about the number, the 9 million?
We've lost 9 million Californians since the pandemic began 2 years ago.
What do you mean we lost 9 million Californians?
We have had 9 million fatalities.
But not due to COVID?
Yes, due to COVID.
Okay, you have to explain that to me because the national figure is just under 1 million.
900,000, sorry,
Okay.
My error, 900,000.
Okay, thank you. You gave me a bit of a scare there. I was a little worried. No doubt there have been fatalities, and I wonder if you think the perception is there and maybe needs to be changed that COVID deaths are neither preventable nor exceptional.
Yeah, I think that perception has been pushed by figures on many points in the political spectrum. And there has been a real movement to normalize these losses and to make them seem like they are just the cost of doing business. I think we need to be thinking differently.
Do you think in part this is driven by, and talk about it from an anthropology standpoint, do we underestimate our own risks?
Some of us may be inclined to underestimate our own risks, yes, particularly those of us who are maybe more, socially fortunate to have, more flexibility in our working arrangements, to be more personally healthy ourselves. There can be a tendency to underestimate our risk, yes.
Okay. And just because this is so important in terms of, what its impact has been, there have been 83,000-ish deaths in California alone from
Oh, thank
COVID.
you for the correction there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Numbers are important. And the U.S. figure is 928,000, latest. And I think you have advocated for a way to memorialize these victims. Is that right? Tell us about that idea and what's behind it.
Yeah, to date, there's been very little in the way of a collective acknowledgement of the significant fatalities associated with this pandemic, we don't have a designated day to remember those losses. We don't have a physical site in the country where people can gather and mourn. People who have lost family members in these last 2 years, I think, feel very ignored and neglected as a result of our failure to invest publicly in a bigger conversation about, the reality of these deaths.
Calling for a memorial reminds me of, for example, 9/11, something else that was tragic. And of course, we have a way to memorialize those victims. What does putting it on that level do?
Sorry, say again?
I was going to say, in having a memorial, which of course we have for example, September 11th, 9/11 victims, what does having that do? What does that say?
I think, there will probably never be a cultural consensus about the overall meaning of these experiences. But when we dedicate a physical memorial, when we dedicate a physical space to the event itself, it's a way of acknowledging at minimum that, yes, indeed, this did happen. This was really an unusual and concerning and ramifying social problem that, we can't allow to escape our notice.
All right, let's go back to the strategy that Governor Newsom will be talking about in just about less than 10 minutes, the endemic strategy for California built on the concept of S.M.A.R.T.E.R. And if I could just ask my producer to put that graphic up again to remind our viewers what Governor Newsom is going to talk about. All right, he's going to elaborate, but basically, post-pandemic, entering the endemic, if you will, he wants a S.M.A.R.T.E.R approach. S.M.A.R.T.E.R, so S stands for shots, M for masks, A for awareness, R for readiness, T for testing, E for education, and R for RX, meaning treatment. So joining us now is Dr. Monica Gandhi to talk about this. I know you had a chance to review this strategy. Dr. Gandhi, I'd like to ask you if you think this is a smart, I guess I'm making a pun here unintentionally, approach.
Yes, I mean, actually, everything that's on that little mnemonic is exactly how we have to be thinking. Just probably two more things I would think about, which is one is surveillance. And in a way, that's what testing means. But actually, surveillance is not going to be done through kind of mass asymptomatic testing, but through wastewater surveillance going forward for this virus, because that gives us an early herald. And the second thing I would say is that I think we're going to be more aware of ventilation in any respiratory pathogen season. The word endemic just means living with it. I mean, it doesn't mean that we wished that we didn't have to, but we have to only because it doesn't have the features to completely get rid of it, which have to do with animal reservoirs and things about the nature of the virus, not humans. So when you live with a virus like influenza, you do everything in your power to minimize its impacts. And the main thing is going to be vaccines, therapeutics, and always doing surveillance to make sure you're not getting from a low level into a higher level. That's what we do for influenza surveillance. But now we have a new tool, which is wastewater, and we're going to be using wastewater in the world from now on.
Oh, that's really interesting. It'll become important, but of course, testing is still an important component. That's part of the T. Dr. Gandhi, if I could ask you to center your camera just a little bit. Yes. I know you were seeing patients and hurried over to join us, and I do appreciate that. I want to talk about the M part of the S.M.A.R.T.E.R. That's masks. Interesting, of course, to talk about that 2 days into this new era of not having to mask indoors in California after the state lifted that. I wonder if you think masking is still important, and how should it be thought about and applied in the new endemic era?
So I think that masking, we learned a lot about masking throughout this pandemic, and we learned which masks work. We were interested in cloth masks to begin with, and actually I wrote some papers on it because it may have been associated with reducing severity of disease. The best thing you can do to reduce severity of disease is get vaccinated. So now if you want no transmission, very little exposure, there are really 6 types of masks to wear. And they are N95s, KN95s, FFP2s, KF94s, a double mask with surgical plus cloth, or a cloth mask with a filter inside. Now, not everyone is going to want a mask. I think that people who are vaccinated and boosted and feel secure about their status are probably not going to be always masking, because again, it is a very effective vaccine. But people who need to mask are people who are still vulnerable to severe breakthroughs at times of high circulation of the virus. And again, not only testing, but wastewater surveillance will tell us when the viral loads are up in the community. And this is always going to be told. And in fact, probably anyone vulnerable should mask every winter anyway for influenza, parainfluenza, RSV, other illnesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dr. Gandhi, thank you very much. We need to take a short little break on air. Of course, we can continue this conversation on Facebook Live, and we will be right back. Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. We're taking Professor Lincoln. This is what we do. We're off air right now. We're still on Facebook Live. I'm going to thank you for your time, and I thank you for holding down the fort alone while Dr. Gandhi joined us. I think we are good to let you go now. Thank you very much for joining us and lending your insights about the anthropological implications of this endemic era. Appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, jumping off.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Gandhi, I'm going to check, because whenever you join us, there are always tons of questions from our viewers, and no different this time. Folks, while we wait for Governor Newsom's press conference to talk about the endemic strategy built on S.M.A.R.T.E.R, if you have a question for Dr. Gandhi, please do pose them here, because we always appreciate having her here to be able to answer them. Okay, I'm going to ask my question, which is, wait, how much time do we have? Checking with my producer. Don't want to start something that we can't finish. We have about 1 minute? Okay. Okay, so Dr. Gandhi, we have a parent, I assume it's a parent, saying that basically, help, when can the kids stop masking? That, I think they're not going to announce until February 28th. What do you think they're going to want to see before deciding?
So I think they're going to want to see that the hospitalizations go down even more. So I don't think we should go on cases for masking and unmasking, because cases depend on how much we test. And also, a lot of cases are being missed because we home test and we don't report that to health departments. The UK does. So because of that, the CDC is likely to change on Monday their metrics for unmasking. They've already intimated this, to severe disease. What's the hospital burden? As long as you're less than 10 over 100,000, everyone should be able to unmask. We're pretty much getting there in most places in the state.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's what's going to come on Monday. But you're right. I mean,
Monday from the CDC. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll be back in 10 seconds.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4,
Oh.
3, 2, 1.
All right, folks, we're on with Dr. Monica Gandhi of UCSF. Dr. Gandhi, it looks like the governor will be a little delayed, probably for about 15 minutes. He was going to start at 3:15, but this gives us a little more of an opportunity to talk. Do you have that time till 3:30 to be with us?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. We've been previewing what the governor's going to say, which is this S.M.A.R.T.E.R strategy. We're just going to throw that acronym back up for you so you can see what we're going to be focused on as we move out of this kind of emergency phase, this kind of back and forth phase of the pandemic of, closing things, opening things. So it's going to be shots, masks, awareness, readiness, testing, education, and RX for medicine. Let's talk about readiness, the R part of it, Dr. Gandhi. What does that mean to you? Like, how do we stay ready for anything that may come, whether it's another variant, another possible surge, major or minor? What do you think?
So think of it this way. Pretend we're in 1919 summer, and that was the end of the influenza pandemic, but it was not the end of influenza. And what happened after the, quote, pandemic phase ended is there was always vigilance for influenza. In fact, we didn't have a vaccine for influenza till 1942. So the vigilance was all testing people, making sure that people weren't coming in too sick. And then now that we have this wastewater surveillance, which is really something we learned from this pandemic, that sewage, frankly, can be monitored for viruses. Now what we're going to be doing every winter is, or even now, is looking at wastewater. If for some reason we see the cases go up alarmingly, or we'll start doing genomic surveillance, making sure there's another variant, and start getting concerned. Now, did this ever happen after the influenza pandemic when it ended in 1919? There was a scare in 2009 with H1N1, but as you know, we've never been in a pandemic phase like that again from influenza. Why? Because we have two tools that we have for COVID. We have vaccines and therapeutics, and those two tools make all the difference.
Okay. Look, I think it's important to point out, and I think you made the point too, that endemic doesn't mean end, as in COVID has ended, but it does mean that hopefully the science suggests no more huge waves, like real peaks and valleys, and therefore no need for constant restrictions and rollbacks. Does the science, when you look at the numbers and everything else, suggest that we are there?
Well, I think it does, but I guess you can never say never with COVID, but I would say there are two reasons why this looks like we're getting there. One is that the amount of immunity that Omicron put into the population, which was sort of crazy. About 50% of people worldwide was exposed to Omicron, even if you were vaccinated and boosted.
50%.
And what that,
wow.
Say it again, 50% of the whole planet was exposed. And in fact, 60% of people in Europe were got infected with Omicron. So what that did is it makes you see the whole virus so that you get immunity across the whole virus, not just the spike protein, which is what the vaccine gave you, but you saw the nucleus and the membrane and the cells, and I mean, you saw the whole cell. What that does is it gives you immunity to the whole virus. So say there's another variant, say there's Omega that comes along. Hopefully you have immunity across the whole virus to save you from Omega. And even if you don't, we will be giving you a booster if Omega comes along. Maybe not an Omega specific booster. They're actually now whole virus vaccines. There's one pending at the FDA called Covaxin, but we're probably going to give you another type of shot. But we have the tools. That's the difference, is we have the tools to hopefully quell that variant with more vaccinations. And if you decline to get vaccinated as an adult, we have treatment for you. And that's Paxlovid, which is the oral pill. So it's more like having the tools and having much more immunity in the population that hopefully takes it from pandemic to endemic.
I think that's the point, that people who are still really nervous, I hope they're hearing what you're saying here, because when you look at the raw numbers and you go, wow, we still have 100 cases per 100,000 people. And, you know, like last June, it was like 3 cases per 100,000. So when you just look at it that way, it does seem like we're, quote unquote, not in a good place. But you're talking about the immunity and the tools that we have to make sure that people, the vast majority, don't get really sick at all. So those things are available, right? And so Dr. Ghaly talked about we need to have different messaging going forward. What do you think that messaging becomes then?
Well, I'll tell you is that in an endemic phase of the virus, actually the problem doesn't become the public's problem. I don't know if you really thought about RSV 2 years ago, respiratory syncytial virus. It should be the medical system's problem. We should be responsible for vaccinating, for having treatments available, for testing people and seeing if this is what it is, so I can give you Paxlovid. But it should no longer be the public's responsibility to keep away from each other, to mask everywhere they go, to distance, to curtail themselves when we're really in an endemic phase. And by the way, as you know, about 9 countries have entered endemic management in Europe, and the whole continent of Africa just declared endemicity a week ago. So it's not like the whole world isn't doing this in some way.
Right. And do some of those countries give us a clue as to how we might be, how we might look a month later, since they're a little ahead of us?
I actually think UK is the best one to look at, because the UK looks like us in the sense that we have a 73% vaccination rate of 5 and above. They also had a high vaccination rate. And frankly, they dropped everything. I mean, they dropped mask mandates, asymptomatic testing, vaccine passports and mandates. They dropped quarantines. They dropped everything all on one day about 4 weeks ago. But the only thing they've kept is that if you get COVID, you need to stay isolated for 10 days. And they're dropping that on February 28th. So they did everything at once. That doesn't sound like what we're going to do. But they have been doing fine so far. Denmark dropped about 2 weeks ago, and Denmark keeps on putting out information because a lot of people online are saying, look, Denmark's hospitalizations are going up, and they keep on patiently putting out information saying, please look at our hospitalizations, we swab everyone for COVID. We don't think our hospitalizations are going up. You can keep on watching us, and we're going to keep on putting out this data. So far, Denmark, UK are looking okay. Switzerland just did it yesterday. Finland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, all did it over this last week. Okay. So essentially, we're going to have to watch everyone.
All right, Dr. Gandhi, thank you so much. Don't go away. We'll continue to chat on Facebook Live, answer your questions. I see a whole bunch of them, and we'll be back with more. All right, on Facebook Live, Dr. Gandhi, please, thank you very much in advance for answering some of these questions. Thor wants to know, if you get a positive home test, do you recommend getting tested also at a hospital to know what is exactly that diagnosis, either Delta variant or COVID? If not, then what do you recommend?
Well, I'll tell you that we in a hospital don't have the capability to genetically sequence it and say if it's Delta or Omicron. At this point, I think almost 99% of our strains in this country are Omicron. You're right that we were going from Delta to Omicron for a while, but now Omicron has just taken over. So it's likely Omicron. If you get a home test, you should definitely stay away from people for 5 days and then mask for the next 5 days. But unless you're ill and need medication, and usually the people who are needing medication really don't feel well, or they have risk factors for severe breakthroughs, you don't need to do anything else.
All right, Dr. Gandhi, Robert wants to know, is the second booster still not officially recommended for all?
It's a great question. The second booster is only recommended for severely immunocompromised patients, and that's all that has been recommended for in this country. Now, there was a big CDC study that showed who's at risk for severe breakthroughs, and the other group at risk for severe breakthroughs were over 75 with 4 comorbidities. So Sweden just approved a 4th shot for everyone over 80, and I would expect the United States to start thinking about older age, and I mean over 80 or over 75, to get a 4th shot.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Hang on to your next thought, because we'll be coming back in about 10 seconds.
15.
It's Paxlovid, right? Am I saying that right? Paxlovid?
Paxlovid.
Okay.
Yeah.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And we are back with Dr. Monica Gandhi previewing Governor Gavin Newsom's plan. In fact, he is starting right now talking about the endemic strategy he's calling S.M.A.R.T.E.R.
Madam Mayor, in particular, let me extend my gratitude and appreciation to you for the privilege of having us back here in the Inland Empire and being here in particular at one of our 2 warehouses that is leased by the Office of Emergency Services, a warehouse, this warehouse in particular, roughly 1 million square feet, which now is housing a demonstrable example of our preparedness as we move into the next phase of this pandemic, a warehouse that did not exist 2 years ago, a warehouse that now has been replicated in other parts of the state, some much more modest in size and scope, allowing us to have the confidence to be more assured that we are prepared for the uncertainties, the things that are about to appear and yet to come as it relates to the vagaries and the challenges associated with this pandemic. You know, this, as the Congresswoman said, has been a remarkable 2 years for everybody. No one has been immune from the stress and travail, the heartache, the devastation. But many of us have shared those burdens disproportionately, unequally. Those issues are all part and parcel of a consciousness that brings us to this moment. As we reflect not only on the 2 years, the lessons learned with humility, but we, again, prepare for the uncertainties that lie ahead. The journey we've been on, I think, only reinforces the fundamental construct and understanding that while we can't predict the future, we can better prepare for it. Why we have done a remarkable job, and I appreciate the Congresswoman's recognition as a state of keeping people alive, and I just want to underscore that. California, as it relates to larger states, one of the lowest death rates in the United States of America, 50% lower death rates in California, a state like Florida, 35+% lower death rate than states like Texas, lower death rates in Illinois and Pennsylvania and New York. I can go on. While that's been the case, and our economy has grown at a faster clip, 26% of America's jobs coming out of the state of California in December, 26% of U.S. jobs coming out of the state just this past December. We have been ravaged by this. Number of lives lost, those that have lost loved ones, those that have lost confidence and trust, not just in institutions, but often in each other. The relationships that have been frayed, those that are feeling more lonely than ever, more isolated and disconnected than ever. And so we have work to do as it relates to turning the proverbial page. And what we're announcing here today is about turning a page, moving from this crisis mentality, moving from a reactive framework to a framework where we are more sentinel in our approach, that we stand firm and confident as we lean into the future, moving away from a reactive mindset and a crisis mindset to living with this virus. We have all come to understand what was not understood at the beginning of this crisis, that there is no end date, that there is not a moment where we declare victory. Despite so many of the metaphors that were used during this pandemic, the war metaphors, where we said we will defeat this virus, there was some suggestion that that was a destination, that that was a place, when in fact, we now know it's more of a direction. And in that light, we have put together a plan that we coin as the S.M.A.R.T.E.R plan, because we are smarter 2 years later. We are more adaptable. We are more capable to understand the nature of this disease, the mutations, its variants, and we recognize with humility that we don't know what we don't know as it relates to the future. But we have never been more prepared for that future. And so it's in, again, that spirit of optimism that we now move into a new phase of addressing the challenges and realities of this disease. We move out of the pandemic phase, and we move into a phase which should allow you confidence that we are not walking away, that we're taking the lessons learned and we're leaning into the future. There are those that prefer to walk away, to deny the realities of the last few years, let the virus in all its forms and manifestations continue to take its course. That's not the approach we're arguing for. It's not the approach we're taking. We are taking a more sensible, and I would argue sustainable, health care approach based on the lessons learned to prepare for the unknown and to invest in a future where we can all do better there. And so the S.M.A.R.T.E.R plan is rather simple. You see the word behind me. You see the letters S, starting with the obvious, addressing the issue of waning immunity, addressing the need to continue our work, to get shots, to get doses, to get vaccines into people's arms, to get those that haven't been boosted to get boosted. And we have more prescriptive details and strategies to continue those efforts in partnership with 800 community-based organizations, in partnership with 200 mobile clinic sites through S.M.A.R.T.E.R partnerships, in partnerships with our state-owned testing lab, Valencia Labs, and in partnership with many of our schools and faith-based leaders. You'll hear from the pastor here in a moment, and others that have been on the front lines of that effort. Number two, we want to continue to do more of what you see in this warehouse, and that's prepare. You know, the warehouse, before I was telling Andy Savin when we walked in, I said, Andy, we just walked about 6 feet. I said, these 6 feet of boxes are pretty much all we had 2 years ago in the old warehouse. And we thought that was a lot. I remember when we came back, said, we have a few million masks. I thought, a few million, that will last forever. Little did we know. The country, by the way, was not only out of masks, we at one point had more in inventory than the entire U.S. stockpile. Why did we do that? Because we went to China, we opened up our own factory, and we were able, using the market power of the state of California, to leverage the development and manufacturing of masks. And as a consequence, we started exporting masks ourselves to other states, using only that purchasing power that a state like California could advance. So masking is an important part of this. It's not just...
All right, Governor Gavin Newsom continues to speak. Of course, we'll have all the latest for you on ABC 7 News at 4. Right now, you can head to the ABC 7 Bay Area app, where we are continuing to stream his remarks. And of course, join us at 4 o'clock. Take care.